If she ever failed me, I'd replace her, the Mafia Boss said. Unaware, she heard every word. Roman Calder said it without blinking. 7 words. Flat. Certain, the way a man states the temperature outside or orders his coffee. If she ever fails me, I'll replace her. Evelyn heard it through a half-open door, her hand still raised to knock, her knuckles an inch from the wood. The hallway was cold. Her feet stopped moving before her brain told them to. 3 years of mornings, 3 years of his hand, finding hers across the dinner table, 3 years of believing she understood this man, and then those 7 words came through that door and took a sledgehammer to every single one of them. She didn't cry. She didn't walk away. She just stood there and let it happen to her. If you've ever loved someone and suddenly realized you never truly knew them, stay with me. Because what Evelyn does next will either break your heart or change the way you see love entirely. Before we go further, if this kind of story speaks to you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that hallway, because what Evelyn heard was only the beginning. The rain had been falling since noon. By 7 in the evening, it had turned the streets of Manhattan into something that looked like a painting someone hadn't finished yet. All silver and gray and blurred at the edges. The kind of night that makes the city feel smaller than it actually is. Evelyn Mercer had learned to love rain because Roman loved it. That was one of those small private things she had never told anyone. How she had spent the first year of their relationship, quietly cataloging the things he noticed, the way rain made the city slower, the way coffee smelled different on cold mornings, the way old jazz had a weight to it that newer music didn't, and how she had let those small preferences settle into her own bones until she couldn't tell anymore which ones were originally hers. She was 32 years old. She had a graduate degree in nonprofit management and enough intelligence to run 3 separate departments of a major organization simultaneously, which she had done before Roman. Before the Calder estate, before this life that fit her like a coat she hadn't chosen, but had somehow grown comfortable wearing. She was not naive. She was not soft in the dangerous sense of the word. But she was a woman who loved carefully and completely, and the problem with loving that way is that when it breaks, it doesn't make a sound. It just goes quiet, all at once, like a room where someone switched off the only lamp. Roman's private study was on the 2nd floor of the estate. Evelyn had been heading there with the intention of returning his cufflink silver, monogrammed, the ones he always forgot when he was distracted by something complicated. She had found them on the bathroom counter that morning and had been meaning to bring them up since lunch. But the afternoon had gotten away from her, the way afternoons in the Calder estate sometimes did, moving at the speed of other people's urgency. Climbed the stairs with the cufflinks in her jacket pocket. The hallway on the 2nd floor was dim, the way Roman preferred it in the evenings. Heavy curtains on the windows at either end, a long runner of dark carpet that muffled footsteps. The study door at the far end was not fully closed. Evelyn could hear voices before she reached it. Roman's voice, first low and measured, the voice he used during business conversations, not the slightly softer version he kept for her. And then Darius Vane, his consigliere of nearly 15 years, a man Evelyn had always been politely cordial with and never fully trusted, though she couldn't have articulated why with any precision. She wasn't eavesdropping. That distinction mattered to her, even later, when she replayed the moment obsessively. She wasn't crouched with her ear pressed to the wood. She was simply walking toward the door, and the door was open, and the voices were there. She heard Darius say, "What if Evelyn makes the wrong decision?" She heard Roman answer without pausing, "If she ever fails me, I'll replace her." And then her hand stopped mid-air, knuckles an inch from the wood, and the cufflinks in her pocket became suddenly very heavy, and the hallway, which had always felt like a normal hallway, became something different entirely. She stood there for what felt like a long time. It was probably 12 seconds. She turned around and walked back the way she came. She did not knock. She did not enter the room. She did not ask Roman to clarify what he meant. She did not wait at the bottom of the stairs for him to come down and explain himself. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water she didn't drink, and stood at the sink looking out at the rain. Here is what nobody tells you about the moment everything changes. It doesn't feel dramatic when it happens. There's no music. There's no sudden revelation that sends you to your knees. It feels exactly like standing in a kitchen, holding a glass of water, looking at rain on a window, while your mind quietly begins to rebuild the last 3 years from the ground up, using a completely different set of assumptions. Evelyn went back through the memories one at a time. The way Roman had introduced her to his business associates during the first year. This is Evelyn, without any further designation, which she had read as confidence and simplicity, but now rearranged itself into something more like deliberate vagueness. The way he had sometimes looked at her across a room full of people, and then looked away, quickly, as if catching himself doing something he hadn't intended to show. The way Darius had watched her during dinner parties, not unkindly, but assessingly, the way someone watches a piece of equipment to determine whether it's performing at the expected level. None of these things had seemed significant individually. Together, reframed by 7 words through a half-open door, they formed a different picture. She was not angry yet. The anger would come later, in waves, and it would be the kind of anger that has grief underneath it, which is the worst kind, because it doesn't feel clean. It feels like drowning with your eyes open. Right now, she was simply quiet. When Roman came downstairs 40 minutes later, Evelyn was at the dining table with a book open in front of her that she hadn't read a single sentence. He sat across from her. He said, "You eat yet?" She said, "Not yet." He called for dinner. He talked about something she didn't fully retain an issue with, a shipping contract, a meeting postponed until Thursday, a restaurant he'd heard about in Midtown that apparently had the best osso buco in the city. He refilled her water glass without being asked. He passed her the bread basket. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Evelyn looked down at his hand over hers. She thought, "This is the hand of a man who would replace me." She turned her hand over and let his fingers settle between hers. She smiled. Inside, she began saying goodbye. Roman Calder was not a man you could read easily. That was the first thing people said about him. Not dangerous, not powerful, though both of those were accurate. The first thing was always unreadable. He had built that quality deliberately over decades of operating in environments where being predictable was the same as being vulnerable, and he had perfected it so completely that even the people closest to him rarely had a clear view of what was actually moving behind his eyes. He was 51 years old. He had been running the Calder organization since his late 20s, inheriting a structure that was already powerful and expanding it through a combination of strategic patience and the occasional willingness to be absolutely ruthless when patience stopped being sufficient. He had enemies who hated him and rivals who respected him, and a reputation in certain circles that made men considerably larger than him take a small, involuntary step backward when he entered a room. He was also, in ways that surprised people who thought they understood him, genuinely attentive. He remembered things. That was perhaps his most significant quality, and also the one most people misunderstood. They assumed his memory was a tool, a strategic advantage, a way of collecting information about the people around him. And it was that, certainly. But it was also just how he loved people. Through attention, through noticing, through the accumulated weight of 1,000 small details that told him who someone actually was beneath whatever version of themselves they were presenting on any given day. He knew Evelyn put cinnamon in her morning coffee, not because she'd told him, but because he'd watched her do it on their 3rd morning together and never forgotten. He knew she always paused at bookstore windows, even when she was in a hurry, and would stand there for 30 seconds minimum, scanning the titles before forcing herself to keep walking. He knew she was afraid of disappointing people, more afraid of that than of most things, and that this fear made her work harder than was strictly necessary, and apologize more often than any situation required, and sometimes swallow things that deserved to be said aloud. That last thing worried him. He had worried about it quietly for 2 years, uncertain how to address it without making her feel like she was being managed. He loved her in a way that had caught him completely off guard. He had not expected, at 51 years old, with the life he had built and the things he had done to build it, to find someone who made him want to be different. Not better in the abstract sense. Different in the specific sense, quieter, more present, less defended. He had not expected it, and he had not known how to say it, and so he had said it the only way he knew how, which was through what he did rather than what he said. The pastries on Sunday mornings. The porch light left burning. The way he had quietly restructured his personal schedule to be home more evenings than not, which Darius had noticed and commented on with raised eyebrows, and which Roman had refused to explain. He believed these things communicated what he couldn't quite say directly. He was wrong about that. He didn't know it yet. The changes in Evelyn began so gradually that for the first week, Roman read them as tiredness. The cinnamon remained on the shelf, untouched. She started taking her coffee black, which he noted without comment. She stopped appearing at the top of the stairs when he came home late, which he had grown so accustomed to that its absence left the entrance feeling different in a way he couldn't immediately name. She skipped the espresso she usually carried into his afternoon meetings. She declined lunch on a Tuesday, then dinner on a Thursday, then a movie he'd suggested for the weekend, with a smile and an excuse that sounded reasonable and left him feeling, somehow, like he'd asked the wrong question. He told himself she was tired. He told himself she was going through something private that she would share when she was ready, and that the correct response was space and patience and small demonstrations of care that didn't crowd her. He brought home lemon pastries, her specific preference, not the generic kind, but from the particular bakery on the west side that she had mentioned once, 8 months ago, as the best she'd ever tasted. She thanked him. She ate one. Something in her voice when she said thank you was fractionally off, and Roman noticed it the way he noticed everything immediately, involuntarily, and then spent the rest of the evening constructing explanations for it that were probably wrong and definitely incomplete. He kissed her forehead before she slept. He lay awake afterward for a long time. The man who could read betrayal in the twitch of another criminal's jaw across a conference table could not figure out what was happening inside the bedroom of his own home, with the person he had let closer to him than anyone in 2 decades. And the frustration of that was something he couldn't sit with comfortably, so he set it aside and told himself tomorrow would be clearer. Tomorrow wasn't clearer. Miriam Holt had worked for the Calder estate for 11 years. She was 63, had seen 3 different versions of this household, and had learned early that her job was to keep things running smoothly and notice things she would never speak about unless directly asked. She was not a gossip. She was not a woman who involved herself in other people's emotional business. But she had watched Evelyn Mercer arrive in this house 3 years ago and quietly become its warmth. She had watched the estate, which had always operated with cold efficiency, soften around the edges because of one woman who said, please, and thank you, and remembered every housekeeper's birthday. When Evelyn stopped eating properly, Miriam noticed within 2 days. When Evelyn stopped humming while she moved through the rooms, a habit so small and constant that it had become part of the house's ambient sound, Miriam noticed that too. She said nothing. It was not her place. But she left a plate of Evelyn's favorite foods outside her bedroom door one afternoon. And when Evelyn opened the door and found it, and looked down the hall and saw Miriam's retreating back, Evelyn had to close the door before anyone could see her face. The security team noticed the empty doorway when Roman left in the mornings. They said nothing. Men in Roman's organization learned quickly that observing and commenting were 2 entirely different activities, and only one of them was safe. Darius Vane noticed the tension in Evelyn's posture whenever their paths crossed in the hallways. He filed it away, the way he filed everything, and waited to determine whether it was relevant. The charity gala was on a Friday in November. For 2 years running, Evelyn had stood beside Roman at this event, with the kind of natural composure that made her look as if she had grown up in rooms like this one, moving through conversations about foundation grants and civic initiatives with enough intelligence and warmth that people sought her out rather than simply tolerating her presence as the boss's partner. Roman had watched her at the previous year's gala and felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. Something close to pride that had nothing to do with ownership. The kind of pride that comes from seeing someone you love be genuinely, unmistakably themselves. This year, Evelyn said she wasn't feeling well. Roman went alone. He moved through the event efficiently, shook the right hands, said the right things, wrote the right checks. He was there for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and for almost all of that time, he was aware of the empty space beside him, with an acuteness that was nearly physical. On the drive home, he decided he was going to ask her directly. He was going to sit down across from her and say, "Something has shifted between us, and I don't know what I did, and I need you to tell me, because I can't fix what I can't see." He had the words assembled in his mind before the car reached the estate. When he arrived home, Evelyn was already in bed. He sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark for a while. He listened to her breathing. He told himself, tomorrow. The morning Roman's emergency meeting pulled him out of the estate at 6 a.m. was a Tuesday in late November. The meeting concerned a complication in one of his southern ship corporations, the kind of thing that required his direct attention and would consume most of the day. He kissed Evelyn's temple without waking her, because she had been sleeping badly, and he knew she needed the rest, and he left. Evelyn lay still until she heard the car leave the driveway. Then she got up. She did not rush. That was the thing that would stay with Miriam longest. Later, how unhurried Evelyn was. A sound like green wood splitting. How she moved through the house that morning with the same careful composure she brought to everything, as if she were simply moving through an ordinary day. She packed one suitcase. One. She left the jewelry in its drawer, all of it. Every piece, including the things she had come to think of as personal favorites. The bracelet she wore constantly. The earrings she'd chosen herself from a shop in Paris. She left the designer clothes hanging in the closet. She left the gifts, the shoes, the accumulated material evidence of 3 years of Roman's particular way of loving someone. She kept only what had been hers before. In Roman's study, she placed 2 things on the desk. One was her platinum ring. The other was a letter she had written and rewritten 6 times over the preceding 3 days, long enough to explain but short enough that he would actually read it, carefully enough that it contained no cruelty, honest enough that it contained no dishonesty. She did not accuse him. She did not enumerate the specific injury. She wrote that she had realized she could not remain in a place where she fundamentally believed that love was conditional on perfect performance. That she could not keep waking up in a house where some part of her was always quietly working to justify her presence. That she deserved to be somewhere, or with someone who made her certain of her value, rather than continuously working to earn it. She did not say, "I heard you through the door." She did not say, Darius asked a question, and you answered it in 7 words, and I have never been the same since. She folded the letter and left it next to the ring. She had ordered white lilies for Roman's study. The day before she did this every month, kept the room bright with them, because she knew, in some wordless way, that he liked what they did to the light, and the florist had delivered them that morning, while Roman was still home, and she had arranged them herself before he left. She wrote a card for them. "I hope this room always reminds you that kindness matters." She propped the card against the vase. Then Evelyn Mercer picked up her one suitcase, walked down the stairs, through the kitchen she had spent 3 years learning, past the entrance where she had stood so many times waiting for the sound of his car, and out through the gates of the Calder estate. The November air was sharp and cold. She walked toward the car she had called not a Calder car, not a driver from the estate. A regular car, a stranger, somebody with no connection to this world at all, and she did not look back at the house. She had said her goodbyes already, room by room, in her own way, over the last several weeks. She was ready. What she was not ready for, what she had no way of preparing for, was that she had misunderstood everything. She didn't know that yet. The car drove her away from the estate, and the estate disappeared behind a bend in the road. And the most feared Mafia Boss in New York was somewhere across the city at a meeting about shipping contracts, with no idea that the only person he had never imagined losing had already left. Car was a black sedan with a cracked dashboard vent and a pine air freshener that had long since stopped smelling like anything. Evelyn sat in the back with her suitcase beside her and her hands folded in her lap and watched Manhattan move past the window. The streets were still wet from last night's rain. The city looked the same as it always did, indifferent, enormous, moving at its own speed, with any single person inside it, no enemy inside it. And there was something almost comforting about that. The city did not know. She had just walked out of the Calder estate. The city did not care. The traffic lights changed on their own schedule, and the pedestrians moved in their own directions, and nobody on any corner paused to register that Evelyn Mercer's life had just split cleanly in 2. She did not check her phone. She had turned the sound off before leaving the estate and tucked it into the outside pocket of her bag. and she left it there, and she watched the city instead. The driver did not speak to her, which she was grateful for. She had given him the address of Sloane Avery's apartment on the Upper West Side without explanation, and he had nodded and started driving, and that was the whole of their interaction. Sloane Avery was the closest thing Evelyn had to someone who knew all of it. Not the operational details, Evelyn had never spoken those, had no interest in speaking them. Understood Green implicitly that there were things about Roman's world that she carried in silence and would continue to carry regardless of what happened between them. But Sloane knew Evelyn in the way that very few people knew anyone fully, historically, including the versions of Evelyn that had existed before Roman, before the estate, before this particular life had gathered itself around her. They had been friends since their mid-20s. They had eaten bad takeout together on the floor of terrible apartments and talked each other through job losses and family disasters and the particular misery of being a smart woman in rooms that kept trying to make her feel smaller than she was. Sloane had met Roman exactly twice. Both times, she had been cordial and watchful in equal measure, and afterward she had said to Evelyn, very carefully, "He looks at you like you're the only stable thing in the room." And then, after a pause, "Just make sure that's love and not architecture." Evelyn hadn't known what she meant then. She thought she might know now. Sloane opened the apartment door before Evelyn could knock a second time. She took one look at the suitcase, one look at Evelyn's face. She stepped back and held the door open and didn't say anything until Evelyn was inside and the door was closed behind them. "How long do you need?" Sloane said. "I don't know. Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet." "Okay." Sloane took the suitcase from her hand. "The guest room's ready. It's always ready." Evelyn sat on the couch and looked at the apartment, the warm disorder of it, the books stacked sideways on shelves that were too full, the framed photographs slightly crooked on the walls. Coffee mug Sloane had clearly just been drinking from sitting on the table beside a notepad covered in handwriting, and felt something in her chest loosen slightly. Not break further, just loosen. The way a knot shifts when you stop pulling it tight. "He doesn't know I'm gone yet," Evelyn said. Sloane sat in the chair across from her. "When will he find out? When he gets home?" "Tonight, probably. The meeting usually runs long." Sloane nodded slowly. And then Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "And then whatever happens," she said, "happens." Roman's emergency meeting ran 7 hours. 7 hours in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown that belonged technically to a legitimate consulting firm that handled real estate portfolio management for a rotating list of clients. The room had good windows and bad coffee, and the particular tension that settled into a space inside it when the people inside it understood that what was being discussed had a weight to it that didn't leave room for carelessness. The shipping complication was more serious than the initial report had suggested. There were discrepancies in the Southern Manifest logs, not small errors, not clerical sloppiness, but a pattern that indicated either a systematic infiltration of his logistics chain or someone's inside it who had been quietly redirecting product for personal profit. Both possibilities were unacceptable. Both required immediate and complete attention. Roman sat at the head of the table and listened, and spoke when necessary, and let the people around him understand, without raising his voice, that the standard response to this kind of problem was going to be precise and unpleasant, and conducted without sentiment. He was in his element. This was the version of himself he had spent 30 years building, measured, authoritative, capable of managing crisis with a steadiness that did not waver, regardless of what the crisis contained. But underneath it, the whole day there was a thread of something that had no business being in this room. He kept thinking about Evelyn's voice at dinner the previous week. "Thank you." 2 words. Her specific tone on those 2 words. The fraction of a degree that it was off from her usual warmth. He kept setting the thought aside, and it kept returning. He left the meeting at 3:15 in the afternoon, when the essential decisions had been made, and the remaining logistics could be handled by the people beneath him who were paid specifically to handle logistics. He told Darius he was going home. Darius had looked at him for a beat longer than normal. "Everything all right?" Darius asked. "Fine," Roman said. He said it the way you say fine, when the word is a door you're closing, not an answer you're offering. Darius recognized this, because Darius recognized most things. and he did not push further. Roman rode home in the back of his car in silence. The driver said nothing. The city moved past. The estate came into view at the end of the private lane, the lights on in the lower windows the way Miriam always kept them. Something felt different before he was even out of the car. He couldn't have said what. He had walked through these gates 10,000 times, and he had never been a man who believed in premonition or atmosphere or any of the softer explanations for why a familiar place sometimes suddenly feels wrong. He believed in evidence and pattern recognition, and the kind of accumulated instinct that came from decades of reading dangerous situations correctly. His instinct right now was telling him something. He went inside. The entrance hall was quiet. Not Evelyn's upstairs quiet. Something else. A different quality of silence. He called her name once. Just her name, and heard nothing back, and stood in the hallway for 3 full seconds before he moved. He found Miriam in the kitchen. She was standing at the counter, not doing anything particular, which was unusual for Miriam, who was in motion whenever she was in the kitchen. She was simply standing there, with her hands resting on the counter's edge, and when Roman came through the doorway, she turned to look at him. Her expression told him before her words did. "She left this afternoon," Miriam said. "1 bag." Miriam stopped, started again. She was very calm about it, Mr. Calder. She didn't seem distressed. She just... Where, Roman said. "I don't know." She called her own car. Didn't say where she was going. Roman looked at Miriam for a moment. "Is she safe?" "I believe so." "Yes." Miriam pressed her lips together. "She said goodbye to me. She thanked me. She had her hand on the door, and she turned around, and she said," Miriam's voice went slightly unsteady. She said, "Please look after him. He needs it more than he thinks." The kitchen was very quiet. Roman turned and went upstairs. The ring was on the desk. He saw it before he saw the letter, because the ring caught the light, and the letter was just folded paper, and his hand went to the ring first, and picked it up, and turned it between his fingers. And the weight of it was the weight of something that had already ended. He read the letter standing up. He read it straight through once, and then he went back and read it again, more slowly. And the second time he understood every sentence, not just in its plain meaning, but in its emotional architecture, the specific care Evelyn had taken to not accuse him of anything particular, which was somehow worse than if she had accused him directly, because it meant she had decided. His failures were too large to reduce to a single itemized list. "I cannot remain somewhere. I fundamentally believe that love is conditional on perfect performance." He put the letter down. He picked it up again. "I could not keep waking up in this house, feeling like I was always one mistake away from becoming someone you no longer wanted." Roman set the letter on the desk. He stood there. His hand was still around the ring. Then he saw the lilies. White, arranged in the tall vase Evelyn always used, filling the right corner of his desk. With the particular quality of light they produced, clean, slightly cool, the kind of light that made everything around it look more deliberate. He hadn't noticed them when he first walked in. He saw the card now. "I hope this room always reminds you that kindness matters." Romans read it once and set it back against the vase, and then had to turn away from his own desk because the room suddenly felt very small, and he was not a man who allowed rooms to feel small without doing something about it. He walked to the window. He looked out at the grounds, the lane, the gate, the wet November grass, and he tried to assemble what he was feeling into something he could work with, because that was how he had always operated, converting emotion into assessment, assessment into action, action into result. He couldn't. He stood at the window, and he could not convert this into anything manageable. He called Darius at 8 that evening. Darius arrived at the estate 40 minutes later, which meant he had been close by or moving quickly. And when he came into the study and saw Roman's face, he stopped just inside the doorway for a moment before continuing to the chair across the desk. "She left," Roman said. Darius looked at the desk. The ring, the letter, the lilies. He took all of it in without comment. "When this afternoon?" "While I was at the meeting." "Do you know where she went?" "Not yet." Darius was quiet for a moment. "Do you want me to find her?" "No." The word came out immediately, with a flatness that left no room for negotiation. "No. I'll find her myself. I need to understand why she left first." Darius was quiet for another moment. Longer this time. "Roman," he said. Something in Darius's voice made Roman look up from the desk. What? Roman said. Darius looked like a man trying to determine whether the moment he was about to create was going to be something he could survive. There's something I need to tell you, Darius said. About a conversation you and I had last month. Roman waited. The night of the Halford meeting, Darius said. You and I were in this room. I asked you about Evelyn Shaw, the foundation director. I asked what you planned to do if she made the wrong call on the Meridian account. Roman said nothing. You said you'd replace her, Darius said. Evelyn Shaw, the foundation director. You said you'd replace Evelyn Shaw. The study was absolutely silent. Roman understood what Darius was telling him before Darius finished telling it. He saw the half-open door. He saw Evelyn's hand raised to knock because she was always bringing him the things he forgot. The cufflinks, the files, the small consideratenesses that he had never once acknowledged as the ongoing acts of attention they actually were. And he saw her standing in the hallway hearing one question and one answer and nothing else. He saw her turning around. He saw her going downstairs and pouring herself a glass of water and standing at the kitchen window and beginning, right there in that moment, to dismantle 3 years of certainty with the one tool she had available, a single sentence that had nothing to do with her. She heard it, Roman said. Not a question. She must have, Darius said. The door was open. I remember that. We didn't close it because we thought you were already upstairs. And then Evelyn Miriam told me she'd been coming up to bring your cufflinks. She found them on the... Stop, Roman said. Darius stopped. Roman put both hands flat on the desk. Cufflinks. He looked at the desk surface and he saw, with the specific clarity that only arrives after the fact, the entire sequence. Evelyn walking down the hallway with his cufflinks in her hand. The door open. Darius's question. His own answer, delivered without hesitation, the way he delivered everything efficiently, completely, with no awareness that efficiency has a cost when the wrong person is listening. What if Evelyn makes the wrong decision? If she ever fails me, I'll replace her. 7 words. About a woman he hadn't thought about in 3 days since the conversation. Heard by the woman he thought about every day. Roman pulled his hands off the desk. He stood up. Get out, he said to Darius. Darius stood immediately. He was already moving toward the door when Roman's voice caught him again. Wait, Darius stopped. Weeks, Roman said. The last several weeks. You saw her. You were here. You saw her changing, and Roman stopped himself. Recalibrated. Did you know what was happening? Darius turned halfway. His face showed something Roman rarely saw on it. Something close to discomfort. Suspected something was wrong, Darius said. I didn't know what. You should have said something. Yes, Darius said. I should have. The answer was simple and honest and entirely insufficient, and both of them. Get out, Roman said again. Darius left. Roman sat alone in his study for a long time. The lilies were right there. He could smell them from where he sat, faint, clean, the smell of something that required no maintenance beyond being placed in water and being allowed to exist. He thought about what it meant that Evelyn had ordered them before she left, that she had thought, in the middle of packing her single suitcase and preparing to walk out of his life, to make sure his study had flowers. Not because she was performing care for his benefit, because she actually genuinely still cared, and she was leaving anyway. That distinction gutted him in a way that nothing in recent memory had. He looked at the ring on his desk. He had been carrying his phone in his hand since coming upstairs, and he had not used it. He wanted to call her. Every operational instinct, he had said, locate the problem, make contact, begin the process of resolution. That was how he handled everything. Directness, efficiency, the immediate application of available resources to a situation that required correction. He did not call. He sat in the chair and looked at the ring and understood, with the delayed force of something that had been true for a long time but had never been examined, that the situation was not one he could correct the way he corrected other situations. He had seen her withdrawing. He had seen it and misread it and responded with pastries and patience and portrait lights and every form of care he knew how to give that did not require him to ask a direct question, because asking a direct question would have required him to acknowledge that something was wrong, and acknowledging that something was wrong would have required him to sit with the possibility that he had done it, that the thing he had done was not a single identifiable mistake, but a pattern so embedded in how he operated that it had become invisible to him. he had built his entire life around, never being the one in the room who didn't know what was happening. He had looked at the woman he loved, withdrawing from him day by day, and he had not asked. He had given her pastries instead. Miriam knocked on the study door at 10 o'clock. Roman told her to come in, came to the edge of the desk, and put down a cup of coffee, not the one he usually drank, but the stronger version he asked for when he was working through something difficult, and she looked at him, sheen with the particular expression of a woman who has spent 11 years inside a house and knows exactly what its silences mean. "Did she say anything else?" Roman asked, before she left. Miriam folded her hands. "She said to tell you." Miriam stopped. "She asked me to give you a message if you asked." "Tell me," she said. "The last 3 years were the truest thing I've had. That's why I had to go." Roman looked at the coffee cup. He did not pick it up. "That's it," he said. "That's what she said," Miriam confirmed. She stood there for a moment. Then Mr. Calder. "Can I say something?" Roman looked up. Miriam, who had never in 11 years offered an unsolicited opinion about anything inside this household, held his gaze steadily. "That woman spent 3 years making herself smaller so she'd fit more comfortably into your life," Miriam said. "You're a smart man. You notice everything. So you already know that's true." She picked up the empty glass from the corner of the desk. "Question is what you do with knowing it." She walked out. Roman sat alone with the lilies and the ring and the letter and the cold coffee. He picked up his phone. He did not call Evelyn. He called the one person who had access to the information he needed. "Find out where Sloane Avery is," he said when the call connected. "Not the apartment. She won't be at the apartment. Sloane has a property outside the city, Connecticut, I think. Find the address." He paused. "Nobody touches anything. Nobody makes contact. I just need the location." He hung up. He looked at the ring on his desk. He picked it up and put it in his jacket pocket. The conversation with Darius was only 2 months ago. Evelyn had been carrying this for 2 months. She had eaten dinner with him and watched movies with him and slept beside him for 2 months, while quietly, systematically, and with a composure that he now understood was not indifference, but the most disciplined form of grief he had ever witnessed. She had been saying goodbye to him. He had held her hand across the dinner table. She had let him. And inside she had been gone already. Roman stood and walked to the window and looked out at the dark lane, and the gate, and the November grounds, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt the specific weight of something he could not control, could not redirect, could not outmaneuver with patience or resources or the accumulated force of 30 years of knowing exactly how to handle whatever came at him. He had let her believe she could be replaced. Not through cruelty, not through carelessness exactly. Through the particular failure of a man who had spent so long protecting everything he valued that he had never learned how to show anyone what that value actually felt like from these inside. Evelyn had not left because she stopped loving him. She left because she was certain, absolutely, bone-deep certain that he was capable of surviving without her. And she was wrong. But she had no way of knowing that, because he had never told her. He stood at the window for a long time. When he finally moved, he moved with the specific kind of purpose that had nothing to do with efficiency, and everything to do with the fact that some situations only have one correct response, and that response does not involve strategy or patience or the careful management of distance. It involves getting in a car. It involves showing up. A sound like putting down every piece of armor he had ever built and standing in front of the one person he had failed to make feel certain of her place, with nothing in his hands except the truth and the ring and whatever was left of the man she had apparently decided to love. Before she concluded she couldn't afford to anymore. Roman Calder had spent his entire adult life being impossible to reach. Tomorrow morning, for the first time in 30 years, he was going to let someone see exactly how reachable he was. And he had no idea, standing at that window with the November dark pressing against the glass, whether it was going to be enough. He left the estate at 5:47 in the morning, not because he had slept and woken early, because he had not slept at all, and at some point in the hours between midnight and dawn, lying on top of the bed in his clothes, with the ring in his jacket pocket and the ceiling above him, offering nothing useful. He had decided that lying there was the one thing he absolutely could not keep doing. The drive to Connecticut took just under 2 hours. Roman drove himself, which he had not done in years in any context that mattered. There were drivers for that. There were always drivers. There were layers of people between Roman Calder and the direct experience of doing ordinary things. He drove himself because bringing anyone else into this felt obscene. Because whatever was about to happen at Sloane Avery's lake house was between him and Evelyn and nobody else. And the only concession he was willing to make to the life he'd built was the address his contact had sent at 2 in the morning. 11 words in a text message that he had memorized and then deleted. The highway was nearly empty at that hour. He drove in silence. No music, no phone calls, no voice in his ear telling him about the morning's developments in the shipping investigation or the status of the Thursday meeting or any of the 100 operational currents that normally ran through his days. Like electrical wire, always live, always demanding. Just the highway and the dark and the particular feeling of a man moving towards something he had no tactical plan for. He had run through various versions of what he was going to say. He had assembled sentences, tested their weight, discarded the ones that sounded like a closing argument in a negotiation, and the ones that sounded like an apology, constructed to produce a specific outcome. He had rejected every version that began with an explanation, because Evelyn was not a woman who needed to be managed through information, and he knew that, even if he had failed to act on that knowledge consistently enough. What he was left with, by the time the highway gave way to state roads, and the state roads narrowed toward the Lake District, was something close to nothing. Not emptiness, the opposite of emptiness. The full, unmanaged weight of what he actually felt, which was something he had not let himself carry without armor in longer than he could accurately remember. He saw the lake house before he saw Evelyn. It was exactly the kind of place Sloane Avery would own, a cedar structure on a low hill above the water. Functional rather than showy, the kind of house that looked like it had been there for decades and had opinions about the people who visited it. There was a porch along the front, facing the lake. A dock below, extending into water that was steel gray in the early morning light. Birch trees on either side of the structure, white-barked, winter bare. Evelyn was on the porch. She was sitting in a wooden chair with a mug in both hands, wearing a heavy cardigan over what looked like yesterday's clothes, and she was looking at the lake, and she did not move when she heard his car on the gravel. She turned her head and looked at him, and then looked back at the lake. Roman got out of the car. He stood beside it for a moment. He had commanded rooms of dangerous men. He had sat across from people who wanted him dead and conducted those conversations with perfect equanimity. He had built an organization that operated across 3 states and had never once, in 30 years, been the man standing outside a situation trying to find his footing before entering it. He walked toward the porch. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. Evelyn looked down at him from the chair. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long and only just putting it down. She also looked like herself. More like herself than she had looked in weeks, he realized. The particular quality she had in rooms inside the estate recently, that careful, managed composure, that fractional degree of distance, it was gone. She was just sitting there on a porch in a cardigan with a mug of coffee, looking at him like a woman who had run out of the energy required to perform anything. "Roman," she said. Not a greeting, not surprise, just his name stated. The way you acknowledge something you've been expecting that you still weren't entirely ready for. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I know why you're here." "No," he said. "You don't, not all of it." Something in his voice, or possibly just the fact of him standing there, without a driver, without Darius, without a single piece of the apparatus he normally moved through the world, inside, made her look at him more carefully. She did not tell him to leave. She did not tell him to come up. She waited. He told her about Evelyn Shaw. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps and told her the whole of it, the foundation director, the Meridian account, the specific conversation he'd had with Darius that night, what the question had been and who it had been about, and why his answer had been given in that tone, with that certainty. He watched Evelyn's face while he talked. He watched her process. It saw the moment the information registered. Saw the specific kind of reorientation that happened in her expression when a structure you've been living inside turns out to have been built on a misread blueprint. He stopped when he'd said everything relevant. The lake made a small sound against the dock below. Evelyn set her mug down on the arm of the chair. She looked at it rather than at him for a moment. There's another Evelyn, she said. Yes. In the foundation. Yes, Evelyn Shaw. She's been director for 8 months. The conversation, he stopped. The conversation had nothing to do with you. Evelyn was quiet. Say that again, she said, not loudly. The Washinichu asked someone to repeat something, not because you didn't hear it, but because hearing it once wasn't sufficient. Conversation had nothing to do with you, Roman said. It was never about you. Evelyn stood up from the chair. She walked to the porch railing and put both hands on it and looked out at the lake, and Roman watched the back of her and said nothing because there was nothing to say that wouldn't interrupt whatever was happening in the space between what she had believed for 2 months and what she now knew. When she turned around, her face had changed, not softened. Something more complicated than softened. I stood in that hallway, she said. I know I had your cufflinks in my hand, and I was coming to return them because you'd left them on the bathroom counter, and I thought. She stopped. I thought you'd need them for the meeting. Roman said nothing. And I heard Darius ask about Evelyn, she continued. And I heard you say you'd replace her. And I turned around. She pressed her lips together. I turned around and I went downstairs and I poured a glass of water and I stood at the kitchen window and I rebuilt every single thing I believed about us using those 7 words as the foundation. Evelyn, don't, not sharp, exhausted. I'm not finished. He closed his mouth. I spent 2 months living inside that, she said. 2 months sitting across from you at dinner, sleeping in that house, watching you bring me pastries and kiss my forehead and do all the things you do, and the whole time I was. Her voice went slightly uneven. She corrected it before it went further. I was collecting evidence. Every kind thing you did, I turned it into proof that you were managing me, that you were keeping me comfortable enough to stay useful, because that's what the 7 words told me you thought I was. Something useful. Roman absorbed this without moving. I know, he said. You know now, she said, because I left. Because I packed a bag and walked out, and you drove 2 hours at dawn to find me. But 2 months ago, you looked at me every day across that table, and you didn't know. You didn't ask. You brought pastries. Yes. That's the part, Evelyn said. That's the part that isn't fixed by telling me about Evelyn Shaw. The morning was cold and still, and the lake sat there below them, indifferent, doing what lakes do. Roman looked up at her from the base of the steps. I know, he said. I know that's the part. Sloane came out of the house at 8 o'clock. She came through the front door with 2 mugs and stopped immediately when she saw Roman standing in the gravel. She looked at Evelyn. Evelyn gave her a small, quiet shake of the head that communicated something in the private language of women who have known each other a long time. Sloane set one of the mugs on the porch railing. A sound like green wood splitting. She looked at Roman with the specific expression of a woman who has watched her closest friend be taken apart from the inside and is currently deciding whether the person responsible deserves to be standing on this property. You want coffee? She said to him. The tone was not warm. It was the minimum courtesy of a woman who had not yet determined what courtesy was warranted. No, Roman said. Thank you. Sloane looked at Evelyn once more. Then she went back inside. The door didn't slam, but it closed with a particular finality. Evelyn picked up the second mug from the railing, held it. She's been watching me for 3 days, Evelyn said, making sure I eat, making sure I sleep, asking me every 12 hours whether I'm sure about what I decided. What do you tell her? Evelyn looked at the mug. I tell her I'm sure about what I did. I'm less sure about what comes next. Roman moved to the bottom step but didn't climb it. What would make you sure? He asked. I don't know yet. She looked at him. And I need you to understand that I don't know yet is a complete answer. It's not an opening for a negotiation. I understand. Do you? She said it without aggression. Genuinely. Because your entire life is structured around getting to a resolution. Making a decision, executing it, moving on. I watch you do it with everything. This is not that. No, he agreed. It's not. Then what is it? Roman thought about everything he had rehearsed in the car and everything he had discarded and the thing he had been left with, which was nothings except the unarmored truth of what he was standing there feeling. It's me telling you that I saw you changing. And I didn't ask why, he said. And the reasons I didn't ask is because asking would have required me to sit with the possibility that I'd caused it. And I didn't want to sit with that. So I brought pastries instead. He paused. That's not management. That's cowardice, dressed up as patience. Evelyn looked at him. Something shifted in her face, not resolution, not forgiveness, but a kind of recognition. The recognition of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to be named and has just heard it named correctly for the first time. Yes, she said quietly. That's what it was. They talked for 4 hours, not in the way of a couple working through an argument toward a predetermined reconciliation, in the way of two people who have, by different roads and with different kinds of pain, arrived at a place where the comfortable fictions they'd been living inside are no longer available, and what's left is just the unfiltered shape of what they actually are. Evelyn told him things she had never said directly, that she had spent years in his world feeling like she was on probation she couldn't see the terms of, that the wealth and the comfort and the security, all the things she understood he provided as expressions of care, had sometimes felt less like love and more like infrastructure, that she had been afraid in some wordless and persistent way that asking for anything emotional would be read as weakness, that she had mistaken his steadiness for indifference and his privacy for a door she was not entitled to open. Roman listened to all of it. He did not explain himself. He did not tell her she had misread him, even in the places where she had, because explaining himself would have been another way of not sitting with it, and he had driven 2 hours through a dark November morning specifically to sit with it. When Evelyn stopped talking, she looked at him across the porch and said, "Your turn." "I thought showing you was the same as telling you," he said. "I've spent my whole life in rooms where saying the thing directly makes you vulnerable to the people around you. So I stopped saying things directly. I showed them instead. Spleece. And somewhere in that, I stopped knowing how to tell the difference between what I was showing you and what you were actually receiving. Those are not the same thing. No, they're not." "You showed me pastries," Evelyn said. "I received he thinks this fixes whatever he suspects is wrong." "Yes, you showed me the porch light." "I received. He maintains the household with care." His voice was flat, not defending, accepting. "You showed me a life," Evelyn said. "I never received. You are irreplaceable inside it." The words landed and stayed. Roman held them. "That's the failure," he said. "That's the failure," she agreed. It was Sloane who broke the equilibrium, though not intentionally. She came out at noon to tell them there was food inside if they wanted it. And then she looked at Roman with the expression she'd been holding in check since 8 o'clock, and apparently decided that she had been holding it in check long enough. "Can I ask you something?" she said to Roman. Evelyn made a small sound that might have been a warning. Sloane ignored it, which was something Evelyn had never been able to stop her from doing in 20 years of friendship. "She told you she couldn't stay somewhere. She believed she had to earn her place," Sloane said. "You drove here at dawn. You've been standing in that gravel for 4 hours. And I need to know—" She stopped, recalibrated. "I need to know whether you're here because you want her back or because you can't tolerate losing something." A sound like green wood splitting. The question landed in the cold air between them. Roman looked at Sloane Avery and did not immediately answer, which was itself an answer of a particular kind a man who immediately had a response ready would have given it, and the fact of his pause told Sloane something about how seriously he was taking the question. "Both," he said finally. "At first, when I found the ring on the desk, it was both. I'm not going to tell you it was only the first one from the beginning, because you'd know that was a performance. And it would mean I hadn't heard anything Evelyn said this morning." Sloane looked at him. "And now," she said. "Now it's just the first one," he said. "But I understand why you'd need to hear me say that, and still not believe it." Sloane was quiet for a long moment. "You should know," she said, "that she ordered your flowers before she left." "I know." She also— Sloane stopped herself, looked at Evelyn. Evelyn gave her nothing, just waited. She also cried exactly once, the night she arrived. In her room, she thought I couldn't hear her. I didn't say anything because she didn't want anyone to see it. Sloane looked back at Roman. "She was grieving you before she even left. That's not what someone does when they're walking away from something they're unsure about. That's what someone does when they're walking away from something real." The porch was very quiet. Roman looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was looking at the lake. He put the ring on the porch railing at 2 in the afternoon. He did not open his hand and extend it toward her. He did not ask her to take it. He set it on the wooden railing between them, like a question he was willing to leave unanswered for as long as she needed. "I'm not asking you to come home," he said. "I'm not asking you to make a decision today, or give me a timeline, or tell me what I need to do to get a specific outcome. I've spent my entire life doing that." calculating the correct action to produce the correct result. He looked at the ring on the railing. I don't know how to do this without doing that, but I'm trying. Evelyn looked at the ring. You should know. Roman said, the way I've been running things, the parts of it that made you feel like infrastructure, rather than a person. I've been aware, in the background, that something was wrong with it for a while. Not because of you specifically. Just as a general understanding that I had built something that worked operationally and cost things I hadn't totaled up. What thing's this? He said simply. She looked at him. I'm going to start changing things, he said. Not because it's the right move in this particular situation. Because I looked at the way you left one bag, jewelry the day before, and I understood that I had built a life that was very good at providing for someone and very poor at valuing them. And that's not something I'm willing to stay inside. You do that regardless of what I decide. Yes. She studied him. You understand that might not be enough, she said. I understand that. You understand I'm not ready to decide anything today. I understand that too. She looked at the ring on the railing. Platinum caught the flat winter light and held it. Then why did you drive 2 hours, she said, to tell me things that don't resolve anything? Roman was quiet for a moment. Because you deserve to know that the 7 words you heard were about someone else, he said. And you deserve to know that even if they hadn't been, even if Darius had asked about you specifically, the answer I gave would have been wrong. Because there is no version of that question that has a correct answer other than that doesn't happen. And I didn't know that until I found a ring on my desk and a room full of white flowers and a note that said kindness matters, written by the person who'd just decided she couldn't stay. Evelyn pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum, briefly the way you do when something's somewhere that doesn't have a clear physical location. She did not pick up the ring. She looked at it for a long time. Then she looked at Roman standing below the porch in the November cold no coat because he'd left too early to think about a coat, his hands at his sides, the most powerful man she had ever known standing in the gravel of her best friend's driveway, looking like a man who had finally run out of armor and was still standing there anyway. She said, "Comes inside. You look cold." It was not forgiveness. It was not a decision. It was an open door. Not thrown open, not an invitation to anything beyond the next immediate moment, and Roman recognized it for what it was, and did not make the mistake of treating it as more. He came up the steps. He left the ring on the railing. Inside, Sloane was at the kitchen table, not pretending to read a book, and she looked up when they came through the door, and she said nothing, which was perhaps the most difficult thing Sloane Avery had ever done in her life. But she did it. Roman sat at the kitchen table. Evelyn poured him coffee. It was ordinary, entirely ordinary. 2 people sitting in a kitchen while a third person tried not to watch them. Mugs on the wooden table. The lake visible through the window, still gray going darker now as the afternoon moved toward evening. But underneath the ordinary surface of it, something was in motion. Not resolution, not reconciliation. Something earlier than that. The moment before a structure decides whether it's going to hold or give way, when the pressure has been fully applied and the outcome is not yet determined, and everything that happens next depends on whether the foundation is actually what both parties believed it to be. Evelyn wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at the lake. Roman looked at his coffee and did not speak. And somewhere in that kitchen, the silence between 2 people who had dismantled every comfortable fiction between them, and were now sitting in the rubble, trying to determine what, if anything, was worth keeping. The most important decision either of them would ever make was beginning to take shape. Neither of them knew yet which way it was going to go. That was the most honest thing about it. He stayed 3 hours, not because anyone asked him to, not because the conversation had reached a natural resting point that justified the duration. He stayed 3 hours because leaving felt like the wrong movement, and Roman Calder had learned early in his life that when every option felt wrong, you stayed still until the landscape clarified. He drank the coffee Evelyn poured him. He answered the questions. Sloane eventually stopped pretending she wasn't going to ask about the organization, about the specific nature of his work, about the kind of life Evelyn had been living inside it, and he answered them with a directness that he could see surprised her, but because she had clearly prepared herself for deflection, and received instead the unvarnished version, delivered without apology and without the softening that would have made it more palatable and less true. Sloane was not a woman who responded well to palatability over truth. He understood by the end of the second hour why Evelyn had kept her close for 20 years. At 4:15, Roman stood up from the kitchen table. "I'm going to go," he said. Evelyn looked up from her mug. "The ring is on the railing," he said. "It'll stay there until you decide what to do with it. You don't owe me a timeline." He looked at her, just looked. The way he had looked at her across 1,000 dinner tables, with the full weight of everything he had never learned to say directly present in his expression, in a way he was no longer trying to manage or conceal. Then he nodded once at Sloane, who received the nod with the expression of a woman still withholding judgment, but marginally less prepared to deliver a negative verdict than she had been at 8 that morning. He walked out. The gravel was loud under his feet in the Lake District quiet. He got into the car. He did not look back at the house, because looking back would have been theater, and he had committed, somewhere between midnight and dawn on the drive up, to being done with theater in its entirety. He drove back to New York. The ring was gone from the railing when Sloane went out to check at 5 o'clock. She came back inside and said nothing to Evelyn about it, and Evelyn did not ask, and the two of them sat in the kitchen as the afternoon light went flat and then dark, and the lake outside the window turned from gray to black, and Sloane eventually made soup because soup was the thing you made when the situation exceeded the available vocabulary. They ate in near silence. "He's different than I thought he'd be," Sloane said finally. "He's different than I thought he was," Evelyn said. Sloane considered this. "Which version is the real one?" Evelyn looked at her bowl. "Both of them," she said. "That's the complicated part." Sloane nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment. Then, the man who said he'd replace someone without blinking, and the man who drove 2 hours before dawn without a coat. Same man, Evelyn agreed. "And you're trying to figure out which one you're choosing." Evelyn set her spoon down. "I'm trying to figure out," she said carefully, "whether the second one is what the first one is becoming, or whether the first one is what the second one actually is. And everything this morning was—" She stopped. "Performance," Sloane said. "I don't think it was performance." "But you're not sure." "I'm not sure," Evelyn said. "And I need to be sure. I can't go back to that house and rebuild something on a foundation. And I'm not certain of. Because I already tried living in that house on a foundation I wasn't certain of. And I know exactly what that feels like from the inside. And I'm not doing it again." Sloane reached across the table and put her hand over Evelyn's. "Then don't go back until you're certain," she said. "What if I'm never certain? Then that's your answer." Evelyn looked at her. "But you don't think that's how it ends?" Sloane said. "Not a question. No," Evelyn said quietly. "I don't." Roman was back in the estate by 7 that evening. He went directly to his study, not to work, but because the study was the room where he thought most clearly, and he had a great deal of thinking to do. He had expected to feel, on the drive back, some version of relief, the relief of having done the difficult thing, of having stood in the gravel and said the true things and left without demanding a response. He had expected the specific satisfaction of correct action. He did not feel that. He felt the extended, grinding discomfort of a man who has finally stopped managing his own emotional experience and is now required to simply have it. Darius was waiting in the study when he arrived. Roman looked at him from the doorway. "You could have called," Roman said. "I could have," Darius said. "I needed to tell you something in person." Something sighed. Something in Darius's particular stillness of a man who has been sitting with difficult information long enough to have made his peace with delivering it, told Roman to close the door before responding. He closed the door. He sat down. "Tell me," he said. Darius set a folder on the desk. "While you were in Connecticut," Darius said, "Marcus Hale made contact with 3 of our logistics coordinators in the southern operation, the ones currently under review for the manifest discrepancy." Roman looked at the folder without opening it. "He's been running a parallel operations inside ours for 18 months, Darius said. "The manifest discrepancy wasn't infiltration from outside. It was Hale. He's been using our shipping infrastructure to move his own product, billing the weight differential against our accounts, and the 3 coordinators in the South have been facilitating it in exchange for a cut." Roman was very still. Marcus Hale was not an outside rival. Marcus Hale was the man who managed Roman's entire mid-Atlantic distribution chain. He had been in that position for 6 years. He had sat at Roman's table during quarterly reviews and discussed operational efficiency with the vocabulary of the man who was deeply invested in the organization's success. And the reason he'd had the vocabulary for it was that he had been systematically draining that success into his own pocket for a year and a half. "How long have you known?" Roman said. "I confirmed it this afternoon," Darius said. "I had suspicions 2 weeks ago, but I didn't have documentation. I have it now." 2 weeks ago, Roman said. "Yes. You've been sitting on a suspicion about Marcus Hale for 2 weeks. I needed documentation before I brought it to you. If I'd been wrong, you should have told me when you had the suspicion," Roman said. His voice was flat, not raised. The flatness was more dangerous than raising it would have been, and Darius knew that, had always known that. "I don't need documentation to begin an assessment. I need to know when someone inside this organization has a credible reason to be looked at. That's not your call to make alone." "I understand," Darius said. "Open the folder," Roman said. Darius reached across and opened it. Roman read in silence for 4 minutes. He turned each page with a steadiness that had nothing to do with equanimity and everything to do with the particular discipline of a man who had learned that visible anger was a negotiating tool he was handing to whoever was watching him display it. He turned the last page. He closed the folder. "Where is Hale now?" he said. "His apartment in Baltimore. He doesn't know we know." "Keep it that way," Roman said. "I want Vincent and the Baltimore team positioned by tomorrow morning. Not confrontation. Surveillance. I want his full communication pattern for the next 48 hours before we move." "Understood." "And the 3 coordinators. Suspended from access as of this afternoon. I told them it was a routine systems audit. They don't know the scope." Roman nodded. He looked at the closed folder. "There's something else," Darius said. Roman looked up. "Hale reached out today," Darius said. "Not to me, to someone at the estate." He paused. "To Miriam." The study was completely silent. "He called the estate's main line," Darius said. "Miriam took the call. He told her he was an associate of yours, calling about a household delivery issue. She transferred the call to the staff coordination extension. He left a message not for you. He asked whether Evelyn had returned from her trip yet." Roman's hands were flat on the desk. "He knows she left," Darius said. "I don't know how he knows. He may have someone watching the estate's comings and goings. He may have a source inside the household staff. I'm checking both. But Hale knows Evelyn is not currently at the estate, and he asked about her by name, in a context that had no legitimate reason to involve her." The silence that followed this was the kind that had weight to it. Roman understood immediately, in the way of a man who had spent 30 years operating in an environment where information was weaponized as routinely as everything else, what the call meant. Hale knew his operation had been flagged. Hale did not know how much Roman knew, but Hale was smart enough to understand that if suspicion had landed on his operation, Roman was coming. And Hale, being the particular kind of man who had built an 18-month parallel operation inside someone else's infrastructure, was not the kind of man who waited passively for what was coming. He was the kind of man who looked for leverage. "He's looking for something to bargain with," Roman said. "Or something to use as a threat," Darius said. Roman stood up from the desk. "Find out how he knows she's gone," Roman said. "I want that answer tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." He moved to the window. "And get me Sloan Avery's address. Documented with the Connecticut County records, I want to know whether that property has any public registry connection to Evelyn or to me." "It's registered to Sloan Avery privately," Darius said. "No connection to either of you in the public record. You checked already." As soon as I understood the scope of what Hale was doing, Darius said, I started thinking about who he might decide to involve. Roman turned from the window. He looked at Darius, the man who had been at his right hand for 15 years, who had watched him fail Evelyn through 2 months of deliberate blindness, who had sat in a study chair and delivered information that had sent Evelyn down a hallway with the wrong 7 words burning in her chest. And he felt, in this moment, the full complexity of what it was to have someone in your life who was simultaneously indispensable and imperfect, and genuinely, demonstrably trying. "You should have told me about Hale earlier," Roman said. "That doesn't change. But you thinking about who he'd involved, that matters." Darius nodded. It was not absolution, and he didn't receive it as such. "Get me the information about how he knows," Roman said. "Go." The call came at 11:47 that night. Roman was still at his desk. The Hale file open in front of him. Alongside the results of the preliminary surveillance Vincent had begun in Baltimore when his personal cell phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He stared at it for one ring. He answered on the second. Roman. The voice was Marcus Hale's, slightly rougher than it sounded in quarterly reviews, stripped of the professional smoothness, the underlying structure of the man visible now that the professional overlay had been removed. "I figured you'd be up, Marcus," Roman said. His voice gave nothing. He had answered the call in the same tone he used to answer every call, practiced neutrality of a man who had conducted 1,000 conversations that began in unexpected ways, and had learned that the first 30 seconds of any exchange determined its entire shape. So Hale said, "Here we are." "Here we are," Roman agreed. He picked up a pen from the desk and turned it between his fingers once. "You want to tell me why you're calling my personal line at midnight?" "Because the number I have for Darius gives me Darius," Hale said. "And I don't want Darius. I want you." Then talk. A pause. The sound of Hale breathing in and out once slowly, the controlled breath of a man who had prepared for this conversation and was now checking himself against his preparation. "I know what you found in the Southern logs," Hale said. "I want you to know I know. I'm not calling to deny anything." "That's interesting," Roman said. "I'm calling," Hale said, "because I think we can both walk out of this situation without it costing either of us more than necessary. I have documentation not related to your operation, related to some of your associates' operations, the kind of documentation that becomes very expensive for a lot of people if it reaches the wrong offices. I'm not threatening to use it. I'm telling you it exists. Because I think a man of your intelligence understands that me telling you it exists means I'd prefer a conversation to a confrontation." Roman set the pen down. He had known Marcus Hale for 6 years. He knew the texture of how Hale spoke when he was inside his competence, the measured pacing, the careful vocabulary, the visible structure of a man who had thought his argument before presenting it. He could hear that Hale had prepared this speech. He could also hear, underneath the preparation, the specific frequency of a man who was afraid and trying not to show it, because afraid men prepared their speeches obsessively, and the obsessive preparation was always slightly more evident than they intended. Hale was afraid, but afraid men with leverage were more dangerous than confident men without it. "The documentation you're describing," Roman said. "How many people are implicated?" "Enough," Hale said. "Is Evelyn Mercer's name in anything you're holding?" The pause that followed was a half-second too long. "No," Hale said. "But you know her name," Roman said. "You called the estate and asked for her today." Another pause. Longer this time. "I wanted to understand the situation at the estate," Hale said. "My personal situation is not a negotiating variable," Roman said. "I want you to agree that very clearly. Whatever you think you know about the current state of my household is not something you get to fold into this conversation. I'm not trying to—" "You called my estate and asked for her by name," Roman said. "That's the line, Marcus. Whatever else you think you've prepared for this conversation, that's the line you just told me you're willing to approach. And I need you to understand what happens to people who approach that line." The silence on the other end was different now. The fear was closer to the surface. "I'm not threatening her," Hale said. "No," Roman said. "You're not. Because you're going to give me the location of everything you're holding, and you're going to give me the name of every person in your operation who had contact with my staff, and you're going to do both of those things tonight. Because the alternative is not a conversation you want to have. And your operation is finished," Roman said. "That's not negotiable. What is negotiable is how the next phase of your life looks. You want to have that conversation. You do it my way. You want to leverage documents. You'll spend the rest of your life understanding what leverage actually costs." The line was quiet for a long time. Roman waited. He was good at waiting. He had built everything he had on the understanding that the first person to fill silence in a negotiation was the person who needed the outcome more. Hale needed the outcome more. "Tell me what you want from me tonight," Hale said. "I want the full inventory of what you're holding," Roman said. "I want it in the next 3 hours. I want the contact who gave you information about my estate identified and named. And I want your complete withdrawal from every operation you've been running inside mine, documented and verifiable by morning." He paused. "Do those 3 things, and we have a conversation about what comes next. Don't do them, and the conversation we have will involve considerably more people than the two of us. Another silence. 3 hours, Hale said. 3 hours, Roman confirmed. He ended the call, sat at the desk for a moment with the phone in his hand, and the particular stillness of a man who has just managed a crisis with the professional competence of 30 years, while simultaneously being aware that the crisis had a dimension that had nothing to do with Marcus Hale and everything to do with a Cedar Lake house in Connecticut and a ring on a porch railing, and a woman he had failed to make feel safe inside the one place that should have been the safest. He called Darius. Hale just contacted me, Roman said when Darius answered. He's going to send an inventory of what he's holding in the next 3 hours. When it comes in, I want you and Vincent to begin verification immediately. And I want surveillance on Hale, doubled as of right now. He cooperates. We manage the transition. He doesn't. We move before morning. Understood. Darius paused. Roman. It's a source inside the estate. I know, Roman said. Find them. I already have a strong candidate, Darius said. One of the external maintenance contractors. He's been on the rotation for 4 months. I think Hale bought access through the contractor company. Pull his access tonight. Quietly. I don't want him spooked before we've confirmed the connection. Already done. Roman hung up. He thought about Evelyn at the lake house. He thought about Hale's voice when he said no, the half-second pause before the word, the specific texture of a denial that was technically true and contextually incomplete. Hale didn't have her name in his documents. But Hale had known to ask for her. Hale had known she was gone from the estate. Hale had understood, with the instinct of a man who had spent 6 years reading Roman Calder's operation, that Evelyn was something Roman cared about in a way that made her potentially useful. Roman picked up his phone again. He stared at Evelyn's number for a long moment. It was after midnight. She was at the lake house. She was, by every available indication, safe. The property was private, unconnected to him in the public record, and Hale had shown his hand in the most cautious possible way rather than taking any direct action. He put the phone down, calling her at midnight to tell her that a man who had been running a parallel operation inside his shipping chain had asked about her at the estate, would require explaining the shipping chain, explaining Hale, explaining the specific nature of the threat, which was currently more theoretical than operational, and doing all of that in the middle of the night when she was 3 days out of the most significant decision of her adult life would be, in the most honest assessment, choosing his own discomfort over her ability to process one thing at a time. He put the phone face down on the desk. He looked at the Hale file. He worked through the night. Hale's inventory arrived at 2:17 in the morning. It was extensive. Roman read through it with Darius over the phone, both of them going through the documentation page by page, and by 3 o'clock they had a complete picture of what Hale had been holding and what he had been prepared to use it for, and, more importantly, who else in the regional network had been aware of Hale's parallel operation and had chosen silence over disclosure. 3 names. 3 men inside Roman's organization who had known about Hale for at least 6 months and had said nothing. Roman looked at those 3 names for a long time. He had trusted these men. Not with everything, he did not trust anyone with everything, had learned that particular lesson so early and so completely that it was no longer a lesson but a structural feature of how he operated, but he had trusted them with enough. He had trusted them with the ordinary daily functioning of an organization that required 1,000 small acts of fidelity, and they had looked at what Hale was doing and calculated that their silence was worth more to them than their integrity. He understood the calculation. He had operated inside systems where that calculation was rational for long enough to understand its logic completely. Understanding it didn't make it any less of a betrayal. Handle the 3 names, Roman said. Not Hale's way. Out. Clean. I want them out of every part of the operation by end of week. And Hale himself? Hale cooperated, Roman said. He gets the version he negotiated for. I'm not going to make promises I won't keep, and I told him cooperation bought him a conversation about what comes next. Have that conversation. Make it clear, the conversation has a finite conclusion, and the conclusion is him completely outside anything I'm connected to. There are people who'll see that as soft, Darius said. There are people who'll see whatever they're going to see, Roman said. I've spent 30 years worrying about how things look. I'm more interested in how they are. Darius was quiet for a moment. It's new, he said. Yes, Roman said. It is. He slept for 3 hours in the chair behind his desk, not because he intended to sleep there, because he was working through the documentation at 4 in the morning, and the next thing he was aware of was the light in the study having changed from the amber of the desk lamp to the flat gray of early morning coming through the curtains, and the clock on the wall reading 7:12. He sat up. His neck ached. His shirt was wrinkled beyond recovery. He had the specific physical sensation of a man who had been through something that had taken more out of him than he'd had available to give, which was not a familiar sensation and not a comfortable one. He went upstairs, showered, changed. He came back down to find Miriam in the kitchen, and he sat at the counter for the first time, and as long as he could remember, and let her make him breakfast without telling her he didn't have time for breakfast, because he had nowhere urgent to be for the first time in what felt like years. The maintenance contractor, Roman said, while Miriam worked at the stove, the one from the external rotation. Miriam's back was to him. She didn't turn around. "Hector," she said, "you knew." Pause. "I didn't know what he was doing," Miriam said. "I knew he asked questions he had no business asking. About the household schedule, about Miss Evelyn specifically." She turned now, holding the pan handle, looking at him directly. "Told Darius 3 weeks ago. He said he'd look into it." Roman absorbed this. "Darius told me last night he had a strong candidate," Roman said. "He didn't mention you'd flagged it 3 weeks ago." Miriam set the pan on the burner. "Darius has his own way of managing information," she said. "I assumed he told you. I should have made sure." Roman looked at the counter. The compounding failures of communication inside his own organization, Darius holding suspicion about Hale for 2 weeks, Miriam flagging the contractor 3 weeks ago through Darius rather than directly. The 3 names in the Southern operation who had maintained silence for 6 months were not separate failures. They were symptoms of a system that had developed, around him, an elaborate set of filters that determined what he did and didn't receive. He had built those filters. He had rewarded, over years, the people who managed information before giving it to him, because managed information was efficient and raw information was messy, and he had always preferred efficiency. He understood now what the preference had cost, not just organizationally, in every context, in every relationship. He had built a life inside managed information and called it control. Evelyn had walked out through the gap between what he managed and what was actually true. Miriam put a plate in front of him. He ate. The call from Connecticut came at 10:45. He was back at his desk, working through the debrief with Vincent on the Baltimore surveillance, when his phone showed Sloane Avery's number, not Evelyn's. Sloane's, which meant Evelyn had borrowed Sloane's phone, or asked Sloane to call, and either way, it was not the call he had told himself he wouldn't expect. He answered immediately. "This is Roman," he said. A pause on the other end. Then Sloane's voice, without preamble. "Something happened this morning." Roman's hand tightened on the phone. "Tell me," he said. "A man came to the house," Sloane said. Her voice was controlled, but the control had effort behind it. "About an hour ago. He came to the front door. He said he was doing property assessments for the county, and he needed to verify the occupants of the residence." Roman was already standing. "He asked whether a Miss Mercer was staying at the property," Sloane said. "By name. He asked for Evelyn Mercer by name." "Where is Evelyn right now?" Roman said. Not a question. A demand so direct it was barely a sentence. "Inside. I told her to stay inside when I answered the door. She's at the kitchen table." Sloane's voice went slightly less controlled for a moment. "Roman." This man knew her name. He knew she was here. He knew to come to this specific address. "Did you get a description of him?" "White male, 50s, heavy build, gray jacket. He drove a dark green pickup." "I didn't get the plate." Roman was moving toward the door while she spoke. "Sloane," he said, "lock the front door. Lock every door. Don't open them for anyone who is not me or someone I specifically tell you to expect. I'm going to send 2 people to the property. In the next 2 hours, I'll give you their names before they arrive. Don't let anyone in until I give you those names." "How bad is this?" Sloane said. Roman calculated. The honest answer was probably not catastrophic. Hale had cooperated overnight. The man at the door was most likely someone running a preliminary contact, establishing whether Evelyn was actually at the property, not preparing an immediate action. Hale had been in a cooperative conversation with Roman's people since 2 in the morning, which meant direct action against Evelyn would be a suicidal escalation on Hale's part. Probably was not enough. It's manageable, Roman said. But I'm not taking chances. Keep the doors locked. Go outside. I'll call you with names in 30 minutes. He ended the call. He stood in the hallway outside his study for exactly 3 seconds, which was the amount of time it took him to convert the information into a sequence of actions, and then he moved. He called Vincent first. He gave Vincent the description of the man and the vehicle and the location and told him he wanted 2 people at the lake house property within 90 minutes. Protection detail. No contact with anyone at the property until Roman personally confirmed their deployment to Sloan. He called Darius second. Hale sent someone to Connecticut, Roman said. A sharp intake of breath. He was in a cooperative posture all night. He cooperated with what he decided to cooperate with, Roman said. The contact in Connecticut was probably already in motion before he called me. He gave me the inventory and hoped I wouldn't find out about the house visit until it was past. Do you want me to end the conversation with Hale? Roman said. Whatever we offered him in exchange for cooperation is contingent on cooperation. A man who cooperated with one hand while sending someone to verify my partner's location with the other is not cooperating. Make that clear. Then tell me where Hale physically is right now. Baltimore apartment, Darius said. Vincent has eyes on him. Keep them there, Roman said. I want to know the moment he moves. He ended the call. He was already in the car. He was already driving. The estate's gate opened as he approached it, and he went through without stopping and turned onto the main road, heading northeast, and pushed the car to the speed that the road allowed and the speed beyond it. He thought about Evelyn at the kitchen table inside a locked cedar house with Sloane Avery standing guard over her. He thought about having sat in that same kitchen yesterday with a mug of coffee and the lake visible through the window, the most ordinary possible scene, the specific texture of 2 people beginning barely, tentatively, to reassemble something from the pieces of what had broken between them. He thought about the ring on the porch railing. He pushed the car harder. He was 40 minutes from the Connecticut property when his phone lit up with Vincent's number. Talk, Roman said. The man in the gray jacket, Vincent said. We ran the truck description against property access records for that county. The vehicle is registered to a contractor company out of Baltimore. Contractor company shares a corporate address with one of Hale's shell entities. Confirmed connection. Confirmed, Vincent said. My people are 12 minutes from the property. The man in the gray jackets left out approximately 40 minutes ago. We have him on a traffic camera heading south on the state highway. He's not going back to the property. He got his confirmation and he's done. He confirmed she was there, Roman said. Most likely. Which means Hale knows she's there, and the cooperative posture was partial, Vincent said. He gave you the inventory. He didn't give you everything. Roman was quiet for a moment. When my people arrive at the property, Roman said, I want the perimeter established before I get there. I don't want Evelyn walking outside and encountering armed men without context. Understood. I'll have them hold 100 yards back until you arrive and make the introduction. Good, he drove. The state roads narrowed. The birch trees appeared on either side of the road, white-barked, winter bare, and the lake appeared below through the gaps in the tree line, and the sun the cedar house came into view at the top of the low hill, with its porch facing the water. He pulled into the gravel and got out of the car. The front door opened before he reached the porch steps. Evelyn stood in the doorway. She had her arms crossed, not closed off. Cold, actually cold. The cardigan insufficient for the November air. And she looked at him, coming up the path with an expression that had several things in it simultaneously. Something that was almost relief, and something that was almost anger, and something underneath, both of those that was older and harder to name. He knew my name, she said. Yes, Roman said. He came up the steps. He stopped in front of her. He won't be back. I have people coming who are going to stay at the perimeter of this property. For as long as you're here. You won't see them, but they'll be here. Who is he? A problem inside my organization that I've been managing since yesterday, Roman said. He used you as leverage. It didn't work. It won't. Evelyn looked at him. Roman, she said, this is exactly what I left to get away from. I know, he said, people knowing my name. People coming to doors asking for me. Her voice was controlled, and the control was costing her. This is what I meant when I wrote the letter. I cannot, she stopped. Started again. I cannot live in a world where strangers know where I am because of who you are. I know, he said. That's not an answer. I know it's not an answer. But I need you to hear that this specific situation is the last of its kind. Because I am in the process of removing myself from the parts of my world that produce this kind of situation. And what happened this morning is not what your life looks like. Going forward, if you can't promise that, she said. No, he said. I can't promise it. I can tell you it's what I'm building toward. That's all I can tell you, honestly. And I'm only going to tell you things honestly from this point forward, even when the honest thing is that I can't promise. Sloane appeared behind Evelyn in the doorway. She looked at Roman. She looked at the expression on Evelyn's face. She stepped back into the house and left them standing on the porch. Evelyn uncrossed her arms. She looked out at the lake for a moment, gray and still, the November surface flat under the overcast sky, and then she looked back at Roman. Tell me what's happening, she said. All of it. Not the managed version. The actual version. Roman looked at her, and then he told her. All of it. Hale, the shipping operation. The 18 months. The midnight call. The inventory. The man in the gray jacket. The 3 names in the southern operation. The contractor at the estate who had been feeding information. All of it. In sequence, without the filters. He had spent 30 years building around information before it left his hands. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When he stopped, she was quiet for a long time. The lake sat below them. Somewhere on the road at the far edge of the property, Roman's people were holding at the perimeter, invisible, doing their job. You drove up here yesterday without a coat, Evelyn said finally. Roman looked at her. You drove up here in the dark without a coat and without a driver. And you stood in the gravel, she said. And now you drove up here again, because someone came to a door and asked for me. Yes, he said. Both times you came, she said. You came. Yes. She looked at him for a long time. The wind came off the lake and the birch trees moved and the porch held them both. And the ring, she had taken the ring from the railing. He understood that now, had understood it when he saw the empty railing before he'd even fully registered. She was standing in the doorway. The ring was somewhere inside the house. In her possession, not on her finger, but not on a railing either, which was its own kind of answer to a question he hadn't asked yet. I'm not ready to go back to New York, Evelyn said. I know, but I need to tell you something. She paused. I've been sitting here for 3 days believing that what I heard through that door was the truest thing I'd learned about you in 3 years. And I came out here to put distance between myself and what that felt like. She stopped. And then you drove up in the dark. And you stood in the gravel. And you didn't ask me for a decision. And you told me the truth about what you missed, and you didn't dress it up. Roman said nothing. And I started thinking, Evelyn said, that maybe the truest thing I've learned about you isn't what I heard through a door. The lake was very still. Maybe the truest thing is what you did when you found out I was gone. Roman looked at her, this woman he had failed and come after and sat in a kitchen with and left a ring for and driven 2 hours twice in 2 days for. This woman who had ordered him flowers while packing to leave him, who had walked out of his life with 1 bag and no jewelry and a composure so complete it had looked, from the outside, like indifference, and was, in fact, the most disciplined form of love he had ever witnessed, and he felt something he had no efficient word for settle into place in his chest. Evelyn, he said. Don't, she said. Don't say anything yet. She put her hand on the porch railing where the ring had been. She looked at the lake. Roman stood beside her and looked at the lake too. The wind moved through the birch trees. Below, the water did what water does, held the light, moved with the wind, received everything, and gave back a reflection of it, imperfect and alive and entirely its own. Neither of them spoke. And in that silence, something was happening that neither of them had the language for yet, but that both of them recognized as the moment before a decision not made, but approaching, the way weather approaches, first as a change in the air, a shift in pressure, something the body knows before the mind catches up. Roman felt her hand find his on the railing. She did not look at him. He did not look at her. They stood together on the porch in the November cold and looked at the gray lake below, and whatever was going to happen next had not happened yet, but it was coming, and for the first time in the entirety of this long and broken and honest week, Roman Calder was not afraid of what it was going to be. Her hand stayed on his for a long time, not gripping, not the deliberate clasp of someone making a statement. Just resting there, the way a hand rests when the person it belongs to has stopped performing anything and is simply present in a moment, without requiring the moment to be more than it is. The lake below was gray and still. The birch trees moved in the wind, with the dry, papery sound of winter branches that have given up everything they were holding and are lighter for it. Roman did not move. He understood, with the instincts of a man who had spent 30 years reading situations for the precise location of their tipping points, that this was not a moment you pushed. This was a moment you stood inside completely and let it be what it was. After a while, Evelyn said, "I'm cold." "Yes," he said. "Come inside." They went inside. Sloane was not in the kitchen. She had moved herself, the soot splitting, with the particular discretion of someone who understood the weight of what was happening on the porch, to the far end of the house. Roman could hear the low sound of a television through a closed door, which was Sloane's way of making herself both absent and present, simultaneously, available if needed, invisible if not. Evelyn put the kettle on. She moved through Sloane's kitchen, with the ease of someone who had been using it for days and had learned where everything lived. She got 2 mugs from the cabinet. She found the tea without looking for it. She did all of this with her back to Roman, who sat at the kitchen table and watched her, and said nothing. Kettle heated. Outside through the window, the lake was going darker as the afternoon moved forward. Somewhere out on the road at the property's edge, 2 of Vincent's people were parked in an unremarkable car, doing the invisible work of keeping the perimeter clean. Roman knew they were there. Evelyn knew they were there. Neither of them mentioned it. She set a mug in front of him. She sat down across the table. She wrapped both hands around her own mug and looked at the steam coming off it. "Tell me about Marcus Hale," she said. Roman looked at her. "Not the managed version," she said. "You said that outside. You said you'd tell me the actual version. So tell me about Marcus Hale and what he was doing inside your organization and how long it was happening without you knowing," he told her. All of it again, but this time with more texture, not just the operational facts, but the human ones. 6 years of quarterly reviews, the specific way Hale had performed loyalty, the vocabulary he'd used, the particular presentation of a man who understood that Roman valued competence expressed as dedication. How Hale had read the room correctly for 6 years, and then decided, at some point in the last 18 months, that reading the room correctly had made him invisible enough to exploit. What "You trusted him," Evelyn said. "I trusted what he demonstrated," Roman said. "I was careful about the distinction. I thought I was careful about it. But you weren't." "No," he said, "not careful enough." Evelyn looked at the table. "That's what I did," she said quietly. "With you. Through the door." Roman looked at her. "I trusted what you demonstrated," she said. "I thought I knew the distinctions between what you showed and what was underneath it. And I heard 7 words and decided I'd been wrong about the distinction the whole time." She paused. "I wasn't careful enough either." The kettle made a small sound on the stove, the residual heat working through the metal. "Neither of us was careful enough," Roman said. "No," Evelyn agreed. They sat with that for a moment. "The difference," Evelyn said, "is that you were betrayed by someone who intended to betray you." She stopped. "I betrayed myself. I took 7 words and built a case out of them without ever asking you a single question. I told myself it was because I was afraid of what you'd say. But the truth is," she pressed her thumbnail against the edge of the mug, "the truth is, I was afraid of what it would mean if you told me I was wrong. Because if I was wrong, I'd have to stay. And staying meant continuing to live inside. Something I wasn't sure was ever going to make me feel safe." Roman was very still. "So you looked for a reason to leave," he said. "I found a reason to leave," she said. "I don't know if I was looking." She looked up at him. "But I didn't fight it very hard. When I heard those words and turned around, some part of me was relieved. And that part scares me more than the words did." The honesty of that landed between them and stayed. Roman did not rush to fill it with reassurance. He had spent the last week learning, in the most difficult possible way, that reassurance offered too quickly was just another kind of management. "What were you relieved about?" he said. Evelyn considered the question seriously. "That I had a reason that made sense," she said. "That I wasn't just restless, or ungrateful, or difficult. That there was something I could point to that justified what I'd been feeling for months, which was, she stopped again, which was that I had built my entire life around yours, and I didn't know who I was inside it anymore. Roman absorbed this. That's not something I did to you, he said carefully. But it's something that happened inside a life I built. Yes, she said. Both of those things are true. Outside, a bird moved through the bare branches of the birch trees and was gone. The lake held its flat gray color and didn't offer anything. I don't know how to promise you that won't happen again, Roman said. Because the honest answer is that I built something that contracts around the person inside it. That's the nature of what I built. And I'm in the process of taking it apart. But taking it apart doesn't happen in a week. I know. It's going to take time. It's going to be imperfect. I know that too. And during the time it takes, he said, you would have to be willing to live inside something that isn't finished yet. Evelyn looked at him across the kitchen table. I've been living inside something that wasn't finished for 3 years, she said. I'm not afraid of unfinished. I'm afraid of unacknowledged. Then I'll acknowledge it, he said. Every step, every failure, everything I miss. You'll miss things, she said. You're going to miss things because that's who you are, and it doesn't turn off. Yes. And when you miss things, you don't get to bring me pastries instead of asking. No, you ask, she said. That's the only rule I actually need. You ask. Roman looked at her. I ask, he said. Sloane came out of the back room. At 6 o'clock, she stood in the kitchen doorway and assessed the situation with the practiced eye of a woman who had been reading rooms for 20 years and had developed, somewhere in that practice, a nearly clinical ability to determine emotional temperature without requiring anyone to speak. She looked at Evelyn. She looked at Roman. She went to the refrigerator and started pulling things out for dinner without saying a word, and that was its own answer. Sloane Avery did not feed people. She was trying to expel from her kitchen. Over dinner, the conversation moved through practical things. Roman's people at the perimeter, how long they needed to stay. The situation with Hale, which Roman laid out in plain terms without the organizational jargon he normally used to describe operational matters, because Evelyn had asked for the plain version, and he was committed to that now. The timeline of his intended restructuring, not a vague promise, but an actual sequence, specific decisions he'd already made, and was in the process of executing, entities he was, in the process of removing himself from. Sloane listened to all of this with her fork in her hand, and her expression doing the controlled, careful work of a woman who was updating her assessment in real time and had the self-discipline not to announce each update as it arrived. When Roman finished describing the timeline, Sloane said, "And the parts you can't remove yourself from." Roman looked at her. "You're not describing a complete exit," Sloane said. "You're describing a reduction. There are parts of what you do that don't get dismantled." "Yes," Roman said. "So Evelyn's life is still inside something that has edges she doesn't control." Sloane started. "It's a fair question," Roman said. "Yes, there are parts of my world that don't disappear. The legitimate structures are real businesses they have, employees, obligations, operational requirements. The restructuring removes the most dangerous elements, not all risk entirely. Anyone who told you it removed all risk entirely would be lying." Sloane set her fork down. "Then why," she said, "does she go back?" Question was not hostile. It was direct, which was different. It was the question of a woman who had spent 4 days watching her closest friend navigate the wreckage of something she had believed in, and who required an answer that was at least as honest as the damage had been. Roman looked at Sloane Avery across the kitchen table of her lake house. "Because she decides to," he said. "Not because I ask her to. Not because it's the path of least resistance. Because she looks at what this is, the real version, not the comfortable version, and she decides it's worth choosing." He paused. "And if she decides it's not, that's also a real answer. I'm not here to negotiate her into a decision. I'm here to make sure the decision she makes is based on accurate information." Sloane looked at him for a long moment. She looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was looking at the table. "Evelyn," Sloane said. Evelyn looked up. "What do you want?" Sloane said. "Not what do you think you should do. Not what makes sense. What do you actually want?" The kitchen was quiet. Evelyn looked at her mug. She looked at the window with the dark lake beyond it. She looked at Roman across the table, the lines in his face, the tiredness around his eyes, the absence. For the first time in her experience of him, of the managed professional composure that had always made him look like a man. operating slightly above the ordinary human frequency. He just looked like a man. A tired, complicated, imperfect man who had driven twice in 2 days through November dark to sit in this kitchen. I want the version of this that's actually possible, Evelyn said. Not the clean version. Not the version where everything he's doing right now means the hard parts don't exist anymore. The actual possible version, with all of what it costs. She paused. And I want to stop feeling like a guest in my own life. Then stop, Sloane said simply. Evelyn looked at her. Stop being a guest, Sloane said. Make demands. Be inconvenient. Stop arranging yourself around the edges of someone else's structure and take up actual space. She looked at Roman when she said the last part. Both of you need to hear that, Roman said. Understood. Sloane picked her fork back up. Good, she said. Eat. That night, after dinner, Sloane had gone to bed with the pointed courtesy of a woman who understood that her continued presence in the common area was no longer appropriate. Evelyn and Roman sat on the porch in the dark. It was very cold. Sloane had left a wool blanket over the back of the porch chair, which Evelyn pulled around her shoulders. Roman sat in the other chair with his arms on his knees, coat on now. He'd gone to the car and retrieved it at some point during the afternoon, leaning forward slightly, looking at the lake. Colnites neatly, black. The surface, undifferent great fet from the sky above it, except for the faint movement of the water catching whatever thin light came from the stars between the cloud cover. I keep thinking about the contractor, Evelyn said. The one at the estate who was feeding information. Hector, Roman said. He was there for 4 months, she said. 4 months of coming in and out of the estate, and nobody told you until last night. Miriam told Darius 3 weeks ago, Roman said. Darius managed the information. Evelyn looked at him. That keeps happening, she said. People managing information before it gets to you, deciding what you need to know and when. Yes, he said. And you built that, she said. Yes, he said. I built exactly that. Because you preferred it. Because I thought efficiency was the same as clarity, he said. They're not the same thing. Efficient information is information that's been optimized for a specific decision. Actual clarity is messier. He looked at the lake. I chose efficiency for 30 years and called it control. What I actually had was a very sophisticated set of filters that were supposed to protect the operation and ended up protecting my own comfort. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter. Miriam's going to outlast all of us, she said. Roman made a sound that was the closest thing to a laugh she had heard from him in days. She told me something on the morning you left, he said. What? That you'd spent 3 years making yourself smaller to fit more comfortably into my life. He paused. She said she'd never voiced an opinion about the household before, but that she needed me to know I already understood. True. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She's not wrong, she said. No, I did that, Evelyn said. That wasn't something you did to me. I chose it. I found it easier to compress myself than to take up space and find out whether the space would be welcome. She turned her head and looked at him. That's my part. That's the thing I have to change, that has nothing to do with what you do or don't do. What does changing it look like? He said. Like what I did at that kitchen table with Sloane tonight, she said. Like saying what I actually want, instead of what seems diplomatically acceptable. Like telling you when something bothers me instead of cataloging it and using it later as evidence. She paused. Like not standing outside a half-open door and building a whole alternate reality out of 7 words I didn't verify. You had a reasonable basis for what you believed, Roman said. I had 7 words and a lot of pre-existing fear, she said. Those are 2 different things. I dressed the fear up as evidence and called it certainty. I do that. I've done it my whole life. I'm very good at it. She looked at the dark lake. You're not the only one who needs to change how they operate. Roman looked at her in the dark. He had known in the abstract that she had her own work to do in this. But hearing her say it plainly, without the careful diplomatic language she often used to soften what she was saying, was different from the abstract. It was the specific and human version of it, which was always harder and more real. The ring, he said. Evelyn looked at him. Where is it, he said. Not a demand. The genuine question of a man who had put a ring on a railing and watched it disappear and had not asked about it directly since. Inside, she said. On the nightstand in the guest room. Okay, he said. I'm not ready to put it on, she said. I want to be clear about that. Taking it off the railing wasn't a decision. It was, she thought about how to say it. It was me not being able to leave it outside in the cold. Roman looked at the lake. Okay, he said again. That frustrates you, she said. No, he said, it doesn't. He was quiet for a moment. 3 weeks ago, I would have tried to convert that into a negotiating position. Try to find the thing I could offer or say that would move it from the nightstand to your hand. He turned and looked at her. I don't want to do that. I want it to mean something when it gets there, not something I manufactured. Evelyn looked at him. That's different, she said. Yes, he said. That's genuinely different from how you usually operate. Yes, he said. It is. She looked at him for a long moment in the dark of the porch, with the cold lake below them and the bare birch trees moving in the wind and the blanket around her shoulders and his coat finally on, and both of them sitting in the chairs, like two people who had traveled a very long way and were not yet at the destination, but had stopped, pretending they didn't know the direction. Stay tonight, she said. Roman looked at her. On the couch, she said. Sloane has a couch. She stopped. I need to say this carefully. I'm not asking for everything tonight. I'm asking you not to drive back in the dark. Okay, he said. And I'm asking because I don't want you to go, she said. Not because it's practical, because I don't want you to go. Roman looked at her in the dark and felt the full weight of that sentence, the specific courage it took for this woman to say that, given where they had been a week ago, given what she had written in a letter on his desk, given the months of careful, disciplined withdrawal that had preceded it. She had said she didn't want him to go, plain and unmanaged and true. Okay, he said for the third time, and it was the most complete answer he had. He called Darius the following morning from Sloane's porch. It was early. Sloane and Evelyn were still inside. The coffee not yet made, and the morning was clear. For the first time in days, the cloud cover gone. The lake below fully visible and steel blue and genuinely beautiful in a way that overcast November had been concealing. Hail from said when Darius answered. Contain, Darius said. He understood the terms when we made them explicit. He's withdrawing from everything by end of week. We have the documentation on the shell entities. His people who made contact at the property here are identified and no longer in the picture. The 3 names in the southern operation. Out, Darius said. As of yesterday. Clean. No incident. Evelyn Shaw, Roman said. Pause. The Foundation director? She needs to be told what happened, Roman said. Not the operational details. But she's been working under the assumption that her position was under review, and it wasn't the review Hale was running, was of his own operation, which used hers as cover. She deserves to know she was used, and that it's resolved. I'll arrange that conversation, Darius said. I'll have it myself, Roman said. This week. Another pause, this one with a different texture. You're back to full operations? I'm back to the operations I'm keeping, Roman said. The restructuring I told you about last week. I want the timeline formalized. Not a vague intention. A document with dates. I can have a draft by Thursday. I want it by Wednesday, Roman said. And Darius, he looked out at the lake. The information management problem. The way things get filtered before they reach me. We're going to change how that works. Define change. I want raw information, Roman said, not processed. Not optimized for my decision-making. I want to know what's happening before someone decides what I need to know about it. He paused. I should have known about Miriam's concern regarding the contractor within 24 hours of her raising it with you. I should have known about your Hale suspicion the moment you had it, not when you had documentation. That's on me for building a system that rewarded the filtering. It's also on you for operating inside that system when you knew it was producing gaps. Darius was quiet. Understood, he said. That's a fair assessment. It's not about fault, Roman said. I know you were operating the way I trained you to operate. I'm telling you the training is changing. Understood, Darius said again. Roman ended the call. He stood on the porch and looked at the lake and let the morning do what it was doing. The light working across the water, the birch trees still, the property quiet, and he felt, in the specific way that follows a very long period of sustained tension, something that was not exactly peace, but was the physical aftermath of crisis finally resolved, which has its own particular texture, sore and somewhat emptied, and also underneath those things, genuinely lighter. The door opened behind him. Evelyn came out with 2 mugs. She handed him one. She stood beside him at the railing and looked at the lake. Clear today, she said. Yes, I'd forgotten it looked like that when it's clear. They stood there for a while and drank their coffee and watched the lake do what the lake did. "I want to go back to New York," Evelyn said. Roman looked at her. "Not today," she said. "And not to the estate. Not yet. I have an apartment, my old apartment. I kept it." She looked at her mug. "I kept it the whole time. 3 years. I paid the rent every month and I told myself it was practicality, and the truth is I couldn't let it go because it was the one thing that was entirely mine." Roman absorbed this. "You knew about this," he said. "I suspected you knew," she said. "You notice everything." He had known. A sound sent theme. He had found out 14 months into their relationship when something in the estate's administrative records had caught his attention, a recurring bank transfer that didn't align with Evelyn's known expenses, and he had not mentioned it, had filed it in the category of things she was entitled to have privately, had understood it. Even then, as exactly what she was describing now, the one thing that was entirely hers. "I want to go back to my apartment," she said. "I want to spend some time inside my own life. My actual life, not the one I built around yours. And I want to do that and have it be—" She stopped. "I want to do that and have it not mean something is ending." "It doesn't mean that," Roman said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." She looked at him. 3 years ago?" she said. "I would have been afraid to say that to you. I would have been afraid you'd read it as rejection, and I'd come home one day and find that you'd replaced." She stopped, heard her own word. A sound escaped her that was almost a laugh, dry and painful and real. "God, Evelyn." "I was afraid," she said, and the laugh was gone, "that if I told you I needed something that was mine, you'd replace me with someone who didn't need anything at all." Roman set his mug down on the railing. He turned to face her. She was looking at the lake, not at him. Her jaw set with the particular effort of someone who has just said something true and is managing the exposure of having said it. "Look at me," he said. She looked at him. "There is no version of me," he said, "that replaces you for needing something. There is no version of me that replaces you for anything. I should have made that clear in 1,000 different ways over 3 years, and I didn't, and there isn't a correction for that except this." He held her gaze. "What you need matters. Not as a problem to be managed. Not as a condition of your continued presence. It matters because it's yours and your—" He stopped himself before the sentence became something he was constructing for effect. "You matter." That's the whole sentence. "You matter." Evelyn looked at him. Her eyes were bright in the morning light. She did not cry. That was not Evelyn's way. She had told him once, early in their relationship, that she cried mostly alone, that it was the one intimacy she had never quite managed to share. He had remembered that. He had respected it. He respected it now. She looked at him with the bright eyes and the set jaw and the mug warm in her hands. "Okay," she said. He picked his mug back up. They stood side by side and looked at the lake. After a while, she said, "I want the ring back on my terms." "Yes. Not today. But I want it back." "Yes, when I decide it's time, I'll tell you." "Yes," he said. "I'll be there when you tell me." She stayed at the lake house for 4 more days. Roman drove back to New York that afternoon, because there were things that required his direct attention, and because staying longer would have tipped the balance from respectful presence into pressure, and he understood the difference clearly as enough now to hold the line. Vincent's people remained at the perimeter for 3 days, and were stood down on the when the last thread of the Hale situation was formally closed. Hale's complete withdrawal documented. The shell entities dissolved. The 3 names from the southern operation fully separated from his organization. Evelyn called Roman on the second night, not with a specific reason. She called and they talked for 40 minutes about unremarkable things, a book Sloane had recommended that Evelyn had started reading, a problem with one of Roman's legitimate business structures that she had a thought about based on her nonprofit management background, the specific silence of a lake house at night compared to Manhattan. It was the most ordinary conversation they had ever had. It was also, in the way of conversations that happen, after the complicated things have been said and survived, one of the most important. Evelyn returned to her apartment on a Thursday. It smelled like a space that had been empty for a while, that particular combination of settled air and the faint ghost of her own habits, the specific arrangement of a life she had put on hold, and she stood inside the door for a moment and just let herself be inside it. She unpacked one bag. She bought groceries. She called her former supervisor at the nonprofit organization, where she'd worked before Roman, and had a conversation that lasted 2 hours, a sound of which she had been invited to come in the following Monday and for a exoneration about a position they were currently filling. She did not call Roman to tell him this. She told Sloan. She called Roman and told him too, and his response was immediate and genuine, entirely lacking in the management she would have expected from the man she had walked away from a month earlier. "That's yours," he said. "That has nothing to do with me. Do it." She did it. Roman came to her apartment for dinner on a Saturday in December. He brought nothing except himself, which was a change from 3 years of arriving with gifts or wine, or the considered demonstrations of care that she had sometimes received as love and sometimes received as maintenance, depending on the state of her interior weather. She made dinner in her own kitchen, in her own apartment, surrounded by her own things: the crooked bookshelves, the framed photographs she had chosen herself, the espresso machine that had been hers before any of it, and Roman sat at her kitchen table and watched her cook and answered her questions and asked his own, and did not once try to make himself larger than the room required. After dinner, they sat on her couch. He did not stay. He knew, without being told, that she was not ready for that yet, not because she didn't want him there, but because she had spent 3 years slowly disappearing inside someone else's space, and she needed to know, at a bone-deep level, that she could choose him from inside her own life, rather than choosing him in lieu of one. He stayed until 11. He put on his coat. At the door, he turned back. "The apartment," he said. She waited. "Keep it," he said, "regardless of what happens. Keep it." She looked at him. "It's yours," he said. "That's not a condition. That's not something I'm offering. It was already yours. I'm just saying don't give it up for me. Give it up if you outgrow it." "Not before," she nodded. He left. She stood in her apartment after the door closed and looked at the space around her: her books, her photographs, her kitchen, her particular arrangement of a life that was entirely and specifically hers, and she felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Solid ground. Not Roman's ground, not borrowed ground. Her own. The ring came back in January. Not dramatically. Not as a grand gesture or a manufactured moment. Date for dinner. On a Tuesday, the first time she'd been back to the estate since the night she'd left, and she came in through the front entrance and stood in the hall and looked at the space where she had once stood waiting for the sound of his car. And the space was just a hall, and she was just a woman standing in it. Miriam came out of the kitchen. She looked at Evelyn. She said, "The lilies are fresh. I put them in this morning." Evelyn said, "Thank you, Miriam." Miriam nodded and went back to the kitchen, and that was the whole of the reunion, which was exactly the right size for what it was. After dinner, in Roman's study, Evelyn sat in the chair across from his desk and looked at the white lilies in the vase, and the way they altered the light in the room: clean, slightly cool, generous, and she thought about the card she had written and left against the vase the day she packed her single bag. "I hope this room always reminds you that kindness matters." She had written that in a state of grief so complete she hadn't known she was in it. She had arranged the flowers for a man she was leaving because she could not, even then, stop caring what his room felt like. That was not performance. That was not obedience. That was her actual self, operating without management. She had been showing him the entire time. He had just never been told what he was looking at. "The ring," she said. Roman looked up from the desk. She was looking at the lilies. "I want it back," she said. Not "I'm ready," not "I've decided," just the plain statement of a woman who knew what she wanted and had stopped making it diplomatic. Roman opened the desk drawer. He took out the ring. He held it across the desk toward her, not placed on a railing, not set down with the significance of a man creating a moment, just held toward her in an open hand, simply the way you hand someone something that belongs to them. She reached across and took it. She put it on. She looked at it on her hand. Then she looked at him. "I'm going to be difficult," she said. "Yes." He said, "I'm going to need things." "Yes." "I'm going to take up space." "Good," he said. Space was always yours. What followed was not a clean story. It was not the story either of them would have written from the outside, looking in. It was imperfect and incremental, and sometimes frustrating, and occasionally beautiful, in the specific way that things are beautiful when they have been broken and repaired honestly. with the brakes still visible. Roman's restructuring took 14 months. It was difficult in ways he had anticipated, and difficult in ways he hadn't. There were people who interpreted the withdrawal as weakness. There were operational complications that took longer to resolve than the Wednesday document timeline had projected. There were mornings when the work was so entangled and the progress so slow that Roman sat at his desk and understood with a clarity he had never had access to before. Why most men in his position never attempted it. He did it anyway, not because it was easy. Because Evelyn was sitting at a kitchen table in an apartment on the Upper West Side, going to a job she had chosen herself, building a life inside which she was fully present, and he had told her plainly, without management, that the restructuring was what he was building toward. He had told her things honestly. He kept telling her things honestly. When he missed things, he asked. Not always perfectly. Not without the residual habits of 30 years, trying to reassert themselves at intervals. But when he caught himself bringing pastries instead of questions, he put the pastries down and asked the question. It was as Evelyn had predicted, imperfect. It was also as both of them had been afraid to believe, survivable. Evelyn moved back to the estate in March, 14 months after she had left it, kept the apartment. Roman did not ask her to give it up, and she did not offer to, and this was one of those quiet negotiations that required no actual conversation, because both people understood what it meant and respected what it meant, and knew that the respecting was itself the whole point. The estate changed, not dramatically, not in the ways that outsiders would notice, but in the ways that people who lived inside it noticed. Miriam noticed that Roman started asking more questions and providing fewer conclusions. The security team noticed that Evelyn no longer arranged herself around the edges of rooms. Darius noticed in the precise way that Darius noticed everything, that the dynamic between Roman and Evelyn in shared spaces had shifted from the old pattern, where Roman operated and Evelyn orbited, to something more genuinely bilateral, where two people were equally present and occasionally inconvenient to each other in the way of people who have stopped performing comfort. White lilies still appeared in Roman's study every Monday, but now Roman sometimes arranged them himself, not every week, not with any particular ceremony, but in the way of someone who has learned that caring for the things that matter to the people you love is not a household task to be delegated, but a choice you make with your own hands. And when one of them began to walk away from a difficult conversation which happened, because that is what happens in actual lives between actual people, the other one asked, not always gracefully, not without the accumulated friction of two people who had fundamentally different instincts about how to manage difficult moments, but they asked. That was the thing Evelyn had said she needed, the one rule, stated plainly on a cold November porch above a gray lake, when she was still wearing a blanket instead of a ring. You ask, he asked. She asked. And when they didn't know what to ask, they sat in the same room until they figured it out, which was its own kind of asking, which was its own kind of answer. On an evening in the following autumn, Roman came home to find Evelyn in his study. She was not at the desk. She was standing at the window with a book in one hand, looking out at the grounds the way she sometimes did when she was thinking, her weight on one foot, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, the late light catching the side of her face. He stood in the doorway. She heard him and turned and said, "The Marchetti contract the third clause. I think there's a problem with it." "Show me," he said. She brought the book to the desk and showed him, and they stood side by side and worked through the clause together. And it took 30 minutes. And at the end of it, he was not entirely sure whether she was right about the contract, but he was entirely sure that having her standing beside his desk with her reading glasses and her opinion and her willingness to take up space in his professional life, as well as his personal one, was the correct version of the life he was supposed to be living. Told her she was right about the clause. She told him she wasn't sure she was, and to have someone else look at it too. He did. She was right, he told her. She said, "Good. Now let's eat. I'm not making anything, so decide." He decided. It was not a perfect story. It was theirs. Roman Calder had spent the better part of his adult life building a world in which he was impossible to reach, impossible to read, and impossible to replace. He had been very good at it. He had built something formidable and controlled, and had called that safety. What he had learned at considerable cost. and in the specific brutal way that real learning happens not through instruction, but through loss, was the difference between a life that cannot be taken from you and a life that is worth keeping. The first kind you build with walls. The second kind you build with honesty. He had started late. He had built it anyway. And in the autumn of the year that followed the worst month of his adult life, Roman Calder sat across a dinner table from the woman who had walked out of his life with one suitcase and the order for white flowers she would not be there to see delivered. And he looked at her difficult and present and entirely herself, taking up exactly the space she was entitled to, and he felt the specific weight of something he had come very close to losing. Not power, not the organization, not the reputation or the control or the accumulated force of 30 years of strategic survival. Her, just her. The only thing he understood now that had ever been genuinely impossible to replace.